In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Krebs, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 17th episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Krebs. In today's episode, we're going to be covering two issues, as usual, of the OSINT Newsletter. It is going to be issue number 103, titled OSINT and the Dark Web, Part 1. It's a part one of a two-part series. And then we're going to be pivoting over to issue number 104, which is titled Gathering OSINT from Live Traffic, Data Sets, and Cameras. In typical fashion, we are going to be doing a high-level overview of the free issue. You can follow along very easily by checking out OSINTnewsletter.com and checking out issue number 103. If you want a direct hyperlink, it's very simple to follow along. It is OSINTnewsletter.com/103. That's where we will start. And then if you want to pull up the second one, it's going to be OSINTnewsletter.com/104. But before we dive in, I do want to go over some housekeeping things. I want to make sure that you're checking out our Capture the Flags that we run every single week. You can find them at ctf.osintnewsletter.com. They're free to participate in. You don't have to pay any money to participate. It's a good and ethical way to practice your OSINT skill set. There's a variety of different challenges using a variety of different skills, from geolocation to email searches to domain investigations, etc. So every time you check it out, there's something new that you can practice. In addition, if you're looking for new tools or methods that you can use inside of your workflows, make sure to check out our tool set. It is at tools.osintnewsletter.com. It is also free to use. You don't need to be a paid subscriber to check it out, but it is a directory of a variety of OSINT tools for different use cases. Not only is it just list the tool and what it does, it gives you a brief wiki on how to use the tool and what the use cases are, as well as whether it's free, paid, or otherwise. So definitely worth checking that out. We update that very regularly, so every time you see new tools that are listed in the OSINT newsletter, you can expect to see them either immediately or very shortly inside the toolkit as well. So again, check that out at tools.osintnewsletter.com. And finally, we have our social media accounts. Make sure that you are checking those out. We post a lot of supplemental information there as well. So if we talk about a tool, you will see videos of those tools in action, for example, on social. So you don't want to miss out on those. You can check us out on X. It's x.com/OSINT newsletter or x.com/OSINT podcast. Make sure to follow both because there is a slight variation between the two of them, and both of them can be helpful in your OSINT journey. Likewise, if you want to find us on LinkedIn, where we have more opportunities for more long-form content, you can check us out by just searching for the OSINT newsletter. Look for the one that has the cat, and then make sure to subscribe to them. Also, and most importantly, check out the OSINT podcast on LinkedIn. Most of you have been following the OSINT newsletters LinkedIn account. Make sure to check out both of them so that we get good coverage on both of those on your social media feed. So that's it. But with the housekeeping in mind, let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with issue number 103. Again, it's titled OSINT and the Dark Web, Part 1. I expect this to be a two-part series. There is a lot to cover here. If you want to follow along, again, it is osintnewsletter.com/103. If you are new to the podcast or the newsletter, make sure to subscribe there as well. We posted a very convenient link for you there to subscribe. It is, again, free to subscribe. It is only paid for you to access every other issue, and there's only a part of the newsletter that is behind a paywall. Those paywalls are designed to keep very interesting methods and sources behind the Google index so that they are not immediately patched and they aren't something that makes it difficult for you to develop your skill set. It's something that is a little bit of an insider's look that can help augment your skill set without you worrying about the method being taken down immediately because it is indexed by Google search. But with that aside, a high-level overview of the dark web. This is something that is intended for beginner and maybe beginner and intermediate investigators. Those of you maybe who have not yet ventured into the dark web for searching for information, but are looking to expand the different sources that are available, or your organization is asking you, what about the dark web? What's on the dark web? But you haven't actually taken a look underneath there yet because you're not super familiar with how to navigate it. This is a good place to start. At a high level, we define what the dark web is and most importantly, what it is not. We talk about the difference between surface, deep, and dark web. If those of you who are familiar have seen that sort of iceberg visualization, the surface web is only the tip of the iceberg. The deep and the dark web is everything that is underneath the surface. And the most information is actually going to be underneath the surface. And primarily, you're going to see that stuff, in my opinion, in the deep web. With that in mind, we also talk about the different kinds of data you'll find, not just whether or not information is dark web or open source intelligence, for example. We talk about what types of information you'll find. We'll talk about the difference between open source intelligence and the dark web information, even though you can collect the information somewhat publicly on the dark web, because it is not publicly available on the World Wide Web. Depending on your school of thought, it is separate from open source intelligence. But in every type of professional environment, you are going to be expected to fuse information that is open source with information that is closed source or deep web, because you're going to have access to tools that you pay for that have data sets that aren't indexed by search engines. You're maybe going to have proprietary data. Let's say you're law enforcement or you work for a larger organization that collects information that they do not publish online. You are going to be expected to fuse all that information together. So knowing how to separate the differences is going to help avoid any confusion for your stakeholders when you report this information in your intelligence reports. And lastly, we're going to be covering things like onion browsers and a variety of different services that are going to be available for you to get started in dark web investigations. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Like I said, I'm going to zoom over this because this is a free issue of the OSINT Newsletter. You can check it out without paying a single cent. So you can follow along, or you can just pivot from this podcast directly to issue number 103. Like I said, we start by defining it, what the surface web is, what the deep web is, and what the dark web is. We talk about some misnomers that are essentially associated with the dark web. Many organizations are terrified for you to investigate on the dark web because they assume that you're immediately going to be infected with malware. You're going to have no defenses whatsoever when you're investigating on these sources, and that's simply not true. So we sort of talk about that a little bit at a very high level. We talk about some of the terrible things you can find, like financial fraud, terrorism cells, CSAM, drug dealing, and more. But we also talk about things that are not so nefarious, like let's say that you're in an environment where certain things are blocked, like you're in a country that has a firewall and you want to be able to see certain sites that are blocked from the internet. You can use Tor services to be able to view things that are typically available to people outside of your country, but you can actually view them inside your country by using things like a Tor browser. With that in mind, we also talk about things like hidden services. Once you get onto an Onion browser, you're going to quickly realize that it's not like the World Wide Web. It's not like Google Chrome. It's not like Firefox. You can't just go to a nifty service like Google Chrome or a Google Search or ChatGPT and ask for all this information that's available. That's not really you're not going to really have a good time there, because indexes are often very, very surface level and links change all the time. So anything that is indexed, that's a very high chance of becoming a broken link if you actually click on it. So that's something that is going to be a little bit different. As a result, you have a lot of things called hidden services. And so, I guess instead of hidden services, there's sort of like wiki pages where you're able to go to a specific site. There's a whole list of things that are available for you to check out. Some of the links will be broken, some of them won't. You'll be able to find specific information you're looking for, at least as a starting point, to get your toes wet, if you will, in the dark web without going too deep into things that might get you into trouble. So there might be a variety of different sources that will be mirrors of sites like I mentioned before. There might be forums that are available that, you'll often see drugs being traded on there, or maybe leaked accounts or other types of things that you might find on a site that you see in the public web, like breach forums historically. You might see versions of those that you see on the dark web as well. So that's kind of a place to start and to check things out. You're often not going to find very, very interesting information on some of these wiki pages, but you might at least get familiar with the dark web and be able to pivot into those things. In addition to that, there are publicly available sources that will get you started as well, that you can pivot from the public web to the dark web. Go ahead and check out a site called dark.fail. For example, it's going to give you a variety of things like Dread, which is like a marketplace, Recon, Drug Hub, Exploit.in, crypto stamps, a variety of other things that you can get started and checking out as well. Remember, before you dive in very, very deep into this, make sure you have very airtight OPSEC. I recommend actually accessing an Onion browser through a virtual machine. that's completely segmented off from a device that you find is connected to a network that might be sensitive. Even better is if you can connect a laptop or some type of external device to a network that isn't associated to a sensitive network, like let's say a hotspot, and then be able to have a virtual machine on top of that to be able to search inside of Onion browsers in the most safe way possible. It may be overkill to a certain extent to do that. However, better safe than sorry, especially if you end up in a situation where you made a mistake and now you're potentially in a bad spot where you may have downloaded malware or similar. So definitely make sure that you are not skipping any steps or cutting any corners before you begin browsing the dark web. The next thing we talk about is what type of information you will find on the dark web. We break things down like data leaks and breach dumps. You'll be able to find things like emails and password combinations. These are things that are not to be used unethically. They're used for ethical or white hat purposes. I'll give you some examples. Let's say you're doing an investigation for a client and they want to know whether or not their email and password has been exposed on the dark web. You can answer that question by being able to search within some of these forums or maybe these other services to see if their information is exposed. You can answer that question, you can say yes or no, and fill that intelligence requirement. Alternatively, you can also use this from an offensive standpoint to be able to investigate criminals. You might find an email address that might be associated, you think, to a criminal, but you don't know if it's a burner account or not. But then you go and find that there's data leaks that have been associated to that email that go back 5-6 years. You can then confirm that that email address is actually pretty old and it has a higher likelihood to be associated with an individual than something that has only been around for maybe 2 weeks. In addition to that, you can find things like phone and mobile numbers, so landlines, mobile numbers, business numbers, things like that, usernames and aliases. You might be able to find images, etc. These are all things that you can use to fulfill intelligence requirements and, most importantly, protect people from having their information exposed on the web, or find mitigating measures that you can have to be able to control that information from being leaked too often. So, for example, there's a lot of times you can do interdiction depending on your scope to be able to purchase things and get them off of the market rather than having them exposed. And this is something that happens very often for many services that are out there. The next thing we talk about is forums and marketplaces. This is often, at the very worst, you might find things like discussions of terrorist activities. It's very, very unlikely you're just going to stumble yourself into a terrorism cell. But this is something that is possible with a long enough effort associated with your investigation. So depending on the scope of your organization, that may or may not be in scope. The next thing is organizational financial fraud. You might be able to find things like leaks of credit card information, check fraud, a variety of other different frauds that are associated with banks or credit services. And this is something that's very, very common. And you'll find it all over the place, especially the selling of credit card information. You might find the selling of cookie data to be able to do account takeover and otherwise. And in addition to cookies being sold, buying and selling of personal data, you might find things like social security numbers, physical addresses, phone numbers, driver's license copies, things like that, things that everybody can use to try to do account takeover. Account takeover is probably going to be a very, very common use case for a lot of these criminals. It's very easy to do relative to other services or other types of crimes. And if you aren't familiar with account takeover, it's essentially you want somebody's account so you can log in, so you can transfer all their money from their account to your account. You want to be able to SIM swap them, for example. You want to get access to their phone so you can bypass two-factor authentication, so you can get logged into services that might have sensitive information. These are all things that you might find as criminal activity that is shared on the dark web. Lastly, we talk about paste sites and shared credentials. Things like Pastebin that you might be familiar with on the open web. There are variations of those on the dark web as well. Because there aren't really people that are maintaining these services for above board profit, if you will, they're not as susceptible to actually policing how their platforms are being used. So you might find a variety of information like stolen credit card information, malware, and exploit code, and a variety of other things that threat actors share online. Those are things that we cover at a high level for different use cases that you might find on the dark web. Then lastly, we talk about really the difference between open source intelligence and dark web intelligence. And if it isn't clear at this point, dark web intelligence is not on the World Wide Web, so it is technically It is technically publicly available because anybody can get a Tor browser and check it out. However, we do have to draw the line somewhere, and not all information that is collected can be considered open source intelligence or open source information. If that was the case, you could just claim that you have a login now. As long as you have a login to a specific portal and you scrape all the data out of it, that's also publicly available because anybody can make a login. That's not really the case, and that's something that we do need to draw the line for. So if you are interested in getting started in dark web intelligence or dark web investigations, this is a great place to start. If you are already an intermediate or advanced investigator, this is probably not the greatest place to start. However, we do have a capture the flag in this case if you do want to get some repetitions in for this skill set. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and pivot on over to the paid issue of the OSINT newsletter, issue number 104, titled Gathering OSINT from Live Traffic, Data Sets, and Cameras. Issue number 104 can easily be followed along if you check out osintnewsletter.com/104. We're going to go ahead and get started with the news section of the OSINT newsletter, issue number 104. The first one is 3 basic but overlooked intelligence analysis techniques. But before I dive in, let me talk about what I mean by an intelligence analysis technique. So gathering and collecting information is one step in the intelligence cycle. But processing and exploiting that data is it's a different step in the intelligence cycle. You can't just collect a bunch of information and say that you have intelligence. You have to be able to manipulate and fuse that data and make sense of it so that it's actually usable. I'll give you an example. If you scrape 100,000 Telegram channels and you grab every single message that has been ever posted on all of these channels, you don't have any intelligence at all. You have a database, you have a bunch of information, but you've essentially just enabled people to be able to search for that information without actually providing them any answers up front. Sure, somebody could search that information, get information out of it, and then turn that into an intelligence insight. However, it is not an insight without that step in mind. So in that case, we do have Paul Preuss, and I'm sorry if I butchered the last name. It could be Preuss, it could be Preuss. I'm sorry, either way. Paul puts out some really good content here. He talks about the 3 different ways that you can take a lot of information and group it in a way that makes it a little bit more usable. He talks about grouping things by location, being able to plot things on a map. So let's walk through this. Let's say that you get a bunch of information that's scraped. You can extract keywords out to be able to determine if locations are mentioned. You can group them by location, and then you can plot those on a map. So imagine you have a map, that's your user interface. You have Germany, for example, as a country. Germany has a lot of information that's available about it because you've highlighted either the word Germany or cities within the country of Germany as keywords. And then you can then only look for information about Germany within that set. This is grouping it by location, and it takes a lot of information and gives you a little bit more actionable insights because you're only looking for it for a specific location. The next thing he mentions is like grouping things by time. Things happen chronologically. You need to be able to sort information chronologically. So let's say you're doing an investigation and you want to find information that is happening, it's either been posted at a specific time or it's talking about a specific time in the grand scheme of things. You want to be able to only find information within that grouping. And that doesn't mean it like the time that you collected it, it's the time that it has been published. So let's say that you have things that's grouped by location. It's mapped. Users can go and check out the map, or they can search by location. They can find information about that location. But then they're like, hey, I don't want to see information that's, over the last year or 2 years. I only want to see information that's in the last 2 weeks. Being able to cluster information by location allows you to be able to filter and get more insights into that information. So now you went from a giant pool of information down to a specific subset of a specific area and a specific time period. And then lastly, you don't want information about pretty much anything that's happened in a location or a time. You also want to know a specific theme, a specific concept, right? Whether you're talking about things like infrastructure, transportation, services, crimes, victims, methods, etc. You want to be able to group by those things so that you can narrow down even further. This is sort of processing data to make it a little bit easier to then gather insights from and then report those insights to people that need to make decisions or take specific actions around the information you're providing them. This is something that Paul talks about in his post on LinkedIn, and it's definitely worth checking out. It is the first thing in the news section in issue number 104 of the OSINT Newsletter. The next topic in the news section is titled Mining China's Little Red Book for Open Source Gold. Now, before we get any confusion, it's not talking about the Little Red Book from the Maoist Great Revolution of China. We're talking about the application, often known as Red Note in the West. And if those of you might be saying, that sounds a little bit familiar to me. If you go back to when TikTok briefly was unavailable, many people were checking out Red Note as an alternative to TikTok. Turns out it was definitely not an alternative to TikTok. If you were expecting TikTok-like experiences, you were not going to have a good time. This article talks about Red Note, which can be accessed via web browser, or it can be accessed through the App Store on Apple or Google Play, and how you can sort of get started by checking out information that is often posted within the Chinese region. There's information obviously posted from all over the world, but the primary use case or the primary user base is going to be Chinese users. It talks about how you can use this application to get very, very interesting information, especially from information from that region. It goes through all the different features that are associated with the application, using the search bar, getting used to different language and different nomenclature or diction that's used on the application. It talks about advanced search strategies, different ways you can find very specific pieces of information, not just general keyword searches that you find within the search bar. And finally, it talks about preserving evidence within or the information that you gather from Red Note. It talks about archiving information using the Wayback Machine, etc. And the bottom line is, if you are investigating things from a global perspective, let's say geopolitical stuff, let's say that you're investigating censorship abroad. This is some of the topics that they cover in the article. This is something you definitely want to read. I'm not an expert on Chinese investigations. I'm not going to cosplay as one, so I'm not going to dig into this very deeply, but I did find it was interesting. I haven't seen a whole lot of content that's covering Chinese social media sources, for example. But if this is something that's within your scope, this is an excellent place to start. Shu Yang does a very good job at doing a high-level overview of this on Bellingcat. And if you've been wondering about it, or you're wondering what happened to it after TikTok came back online, this is definitely something worth checking out. It's not something that is niche. It depends on how you define niche, but there are over 600 million daily searches for this application. So it's definitely something worth checking out. The last thing is something that is posted by the New York Times by Tiffany Sue. I think it's Sue. Apologies if I incorrectly pronounced that. But it is called Hundreds of Fake Pro-Trump Avatars Emerge on Social Media. It is an investigation. So the first one we talked about was an intelligence technique. The second one we was talking about was a specific source and a deep dive into that source. And the last one is an investigation. And it talks about something that is obviously very apparent to people who've been investigating online. And it's finding networks of AI-generated avatars posting content for a specific political agenda. In this case, it is pro-Trump content across major platforms. It's blending spam, just absolutely spamming content, engagement farming, posting rage bait stuff or a variety of other things, and political messaging at scale. I do have a link to a no paywall version of it. Sorry, New York Times, but it is sometimes annoying that you are told that you have 5 free articles every month and you actually get none of them for some reason. Every time you click on them, there's a paywall. But it is something interesting worth checking out. I think this is going to be something that is not only going to be apparent now with a lot of AI generated content, but it's only going to get worse and worse. And when it comes to scams, you're going to see a massive uptick in scams as this AI content becomes more and more realistic. I've seen crazy things like people being able to go on webcams, completely transform the way they look and sound, and be able to seem like they're a different person, even though they're actually them operating this avatar. This talks about things like memes, influencers, deepfakes, etc. And this is an investigation worth checking out. And so a lot of times there are people that are journalists and they want to investigate misinformation, disinformation campaigns, etc. This is an excellent place to start if you want to know what that looks like, if you want to know what good looks like. I'm not trying to be partisan here and say that I want to be anti-Trump by any means. There are tons of different use cases that you can check out from a disinformation and misinformation perspective. In this case, obviously, US politics are very, very popular. You're going to have a lot of pro-Trump and a lot of anti-Trump rhetoric that is online in the US and abroad. This is one lens that you can look at to see how can I identify AI-generated content? How can I find systems to be able to flag for those things so I don't get tricked myself, or I can better navigate the web and find reliable sources. Once upon a time, we actually vetted sources. We had to make sure they came from credible sources that could be vetted by independent third parties. With social media, it's becoming very, very difficult to know what is good and what is bad. You can have an account that has 3 million followers. You think it's legit. It's verified on X. It's verified on TikTok, but it's absolute bogus. So you need to be able to know the difference between what is real and what is not real. And this is a great place to learn how to identify the difference. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and move into the OSINT tools section of issue number 104 of the OSINT newsletter. Again, follow along at osintnewsletter.com/104. All right, the first tool that is on the list is called CoJournalist, and I think that this is the future. Let me explain. CoJournalist lets reporters deploy AI scouts to track pages, social accounts, public records, and then gives you structured, site-ready leads. What does that mean? Instead of you having to go through and monitor tons and tons of sources, and those who work in the intelligence space know what I'm talking about, you have a whole list of things that you monitor, you pivot through all of them every single day, you collect all of your information based on keywords or other types of tooling that you use, and then you distill all of that into intelligence reports, and if you find anything significant, you notify parties that might be of interest. Instead of doing all of that, which is terrible, you can do it all day, and most of the time you're viewing a bunch of crap, you're searching for a needle in a haystack. Instead, you can use CoJournalist. And CoJournalist will do all of that work for you. It'll track all these pages. It'll give you structured information. And then once you have something that is credible, you can then dig into it instead of having to find the pink grain of sand in the brown sand beach, if you will. So this is a great tool for scaling your operations, especially if you are a small intelligence shop. You can deploy it. You can wait for leads to come, and then you can hunt down those leads. And in the meantime, you can do more valuable work. You can interview people. You can get human intelligence. You can find new sources that you can add to CoJournalist to continue to scout for information. And before you know it, you can build an entire intelligence operation with a very, very small budget and a very, very small team. So definitely check that out. It's the first thing on the list. I believe it is cojournalist.ai. The next tool on the list is called Snapchat Bitmoji History. It's a very simple tool. It's a bookmarklet that will pull Bitmoji versions from a Snap profile and displays them in one place, building on earlier research and tooling that was done by my OSINT training. So Michael Hoffman and his group have put this together. It's a very easy tool. Why would you want to use this? People who are active on Snapchat, and there's a lot of people that might be doing scams or fraud on Snapchat. There might be personal users of Snapchat. I know it's very popular with early Gen Z demographic. So those are born in the late 90s, early 2000s. They're very, very prevalent on Snapchat for personal usage. There's at least a little bit of public information that is sourced on there from celebrities, for example. It's very niche at this point, but it is something worth checking out. People will often change their profile picture or their profile Bitmoji in this case. Oftentimes, this can reveal things like demographics. It can give you gender. It can give you nationality. It can give you a variety of different things depending on how these are customized, or it can completely mislead you if somebody is a male and posts a female Bitmoji or whatever. Most importantly is tracking the diff of these over time will let you know if something is suspicious. If it goes from male to female to male to female to male to female, for example, something might be worth looking into if you suspect that this account is already associated with malicious activity. So definitely worth checking it out. It's free to use. Like I said, if you find yourself on Snapchat doing investigations on there, definitely put this into your skill set or into your tool set. In addition to this bookmarklet, the link that I include has all of the bookmarklets that you can check out, and there is a gigantic armory of them at this point. I think I'm just like quickly scanning here. There's at least 24. So check it out. All these tools are free to use, and they do a great job at putting this all together for free. The last tool on the list is called Image Whisperer. It analyzes uploaded media for AI generation and manipulation signals. It produces a single verdict with evidence sourced from multiple different detection models. So instead of having to go through and checking a single image across multiple detection models to see if it's been manipulated by AI, so for example, you think something's been manipulated, you upload it to one source, it says it's actually not AI, and you're like, no way, it has to be AI. So you check another source is like, hey, this actually is AI. Instead of having to go through that workflow, you can use Image Whisperer to sort of aggregate these sources together, have a single verdict with evidence across multiple models. So this is a tool that you can check out. There is a free version that you can use. I believe you can do a couple checks, and then from like 2 checks, 2 verifications that you can do for free. And then there's an option, if you find it very useful, to be able to use an API or to get a plan to be able to do this at scale. So definitely check this one out. That's the last one on the list for OSINT tools. And like I said, the last thing we talked about was hundreds of fake pro-Trump avatars emerging on social media. You can use tools like Image Whisperer to determine if the content you're looking at is real or not. So full circle on this one. All right, the last thing that we want to cover is what's behind today's paywall in issue number 104. Because I think it's important for you to read it and digest it yourself, I am going to be doing a high-level overview, but essentially what I talk about here is something that I think is often overlooked. People are often looking on social media and news sites to determine what's going on in a specific location. Oftentimes, if you're looking for information that might be relevant to travel, you're going to be looking at traffic incidents. You're going to be looking at roadways. You're going to be able to see what's going on. There might be road closures. There might be police activity. There might be accidents, and they might be affecting how people go to and from a specific area. You might find whether or not, hey, is a specific area very, very populated right now, or is it not? Is it a complete dead zone? Is there an event that's going on that I don't know about? Why is there a significant number of people in one location? And I did cover something in a previous issue where I talked about how you can use things like Google Maps and the popular times data set to be able to see if there are people in a specific area of a map, for example, or a specific location in a city. This takes it a step further, and you're going to be able to look at traffic data sets and then overlay those with traffic cameras to get sort of minority report level situational awareness in a specific area. And so there's some use cases that I want to cover. So let's say you're dealing with business continuity. You work for an organization that wants to be able to know for certain if they're going to be able to transport goods, services, or people from one location to another. You can use this information to be able to give more insights into whether or not there's any disruptions. Let's say that you work in executive protection like I used to. You know that your executive is traveling from point A to point B at a certain time. You want to see if there's going to be any issues, police activity, major accidents, etc., that might disrupt that travel. You may just have people traveling to a specific event. Let's say that there's a massive event, think South by Southwest or Microsoft Ignite or something like that. You have tens of thousands of people that are going to this location. And let's say that there's a gigantic multi-car pileup just outside of where the event is going to be hosted. This is information, although it may be niche depending on what your use cases are, that might be useful. It could give you a superpower if you could harness this information, have situational awareness, and notify people proactively that there's going to be disruptions to their plans. So what I talk about is the basics of gathering live traffic data. And when you think traffic data, you probably think go to Google Maps, put in destination A, put in destination B, see how long it's going to take for you to get there. It's going to give you different insights into traffic flows, where there's choke points, where everything is clear, etc. And some of you may have used apps like Waze to be able to see road closures, police sightings, road hazards, stalled cars, etc. These are all things that are basics, right? But what happens if you want to monitor 8 locations simultaneously? You're sitting in an operations center, or you're in charge of business continuity, and you want to see information that's happening in Chicago, Munich, London, Los Angeles, and Singapore all at the same time. What are you going to do? Are you going to have 52 tabs open and 42 screens on the wall and try to digest all the information all at the same time? You're going to have a bad time if you do that. You're going to need a small team or a small army of people to actually be good at that. So I do talk about taking it to the next level. how you can get access to a variety of different APIs that will allow you to build your own custom tooling to suck in all of this information from variety sources and put it in a single pane of glass. You could be able to monitor multiple locations all at the same time. You might be able to get access to traffic cameras from multiple locations of interest instead of having to pivot to Department of Transportation sites in 15 different states, for example. So you want to aggregate all of that information together so it's more useful for you as an investigator. In addition to that, let's say that you want to get traffic information or incidents that are on roadways. If you just rely on a single source like MapQuest Traffic API, for example, you're only going to get one lens into information that might be interesting to you. But what happens if you actually aggregate all this information from multiple sources? You can use MapQuest's Accident API. You can use Waze's unofficial API to pull in police sightings and a variety of other things that might be available from third parties. You can combine all of that together into a single source so you can get a variety of different traffic-related or roadway-related information and put that all into a single source of truth. So you don't have to pivot from Waze to Google Maps to Apple Maps to traffic cameras to third-party sources that talk about things to social media, and et cetera. You can do it all in one view. And that's what I talk about in the first half of this section. But then I dig in even more into live traffic cameras. I used to have to monitor this, like I said, for executive protection as well as for business continuity globally. And you'd have a variety of different sites. You're like, okay, let's see what's going on in Washington State. You go to Department of Transportation, they have about 1,600 cameras that you have access to. You're like, okay, there's only about 15 or 20 that I'm interested in on the I-5 corridor. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of those. Then you click on each of them individually and you have to put them all in like tiny little windows on one screen and view them all and wait for something bad to happen. And then simultaneously, you have another monitor that's looking at social media that has all this information about, from different police accounts. It says accident in this location, etc. But there's no details about the accident. So then you have to pivot on over to the cameras and say, okay, can I see the accident from this vantage point? But I still don't know what kind of accident I'm looking for. What kind of vehicles are involved? Is it a motorcycle? Is it a semi-truck? I don't know at this point. So then you go over the traffic data, the incident data that you pull from places like Waze or MapQuest, and you're like, okay, it's a semi-truck. Let me go ahead and look over here to see if I can find a semi-truck in this viewpoint. This is a lot of different steps that you have to take. I talk about combining those all into a single pane of glass, being able to pull data from multiple sources so you can find all of those insights into one pane or one view. You can say, okay, there was an accident at this intersection. There's a camera nearby. These two types of vehicles got into an incident. It's already being reported by police agencies on social media. There's people that are nearby that are taking pictures and videos of it so you can see it from different points of view. You get that in a single alert instead of 42 different locations. So I talk about that. And then lastly, and this is a bonus, I'm gonna leak it here in the podcast, I talk about something that I think is very interesting, is combining that with rideshare data, right? Let's say that there is a massive pileup or there's a huge event that's going on and you wanna know how all of this is affecting sort of demand in the location, right? You can then go on places like Uber and Lyft and see if prices are through the roof for Uber, for example. I was also digging through on one of their sites on Uber that shows a variety of different cars that are nearby. If you go underneath the hood to see what powers that map that shows all the cameras, it actually shows you like a feed of all the different Uber drivers that are nearby. So if you're interested, you can potentially layer on an Uber or a Lyft layer on this as well. You can say, okay, there's an accident that is in this location. There is a traffic camera that I can view to be able to get eyes on to that location. And then in addition to that, we can determine that Uber prices are starting to go through the roof in that location, so it's a really bad pileup. Or a lot of Uber drivers were caught up in that accident, and so now the supply of Uber drivers has now gone down. These are all things that may be relevant to you depending on your use case, and this is just a bonus little niche data point that I found along the way. So in conclusion, if you find yourself working in use cases like executive protection, business continuity, let's say you work in local journalism that's reporting on traffic, let's say that you work even in law enforcement and you want to get intelligence that's relevant to patrol, for example. This is all information that you can use to your advantage, and I go through it step by step. I talk about the manual methods that you can use, how they're kind of a pain in the ass, and then I also talk about taking that to scale. And with awesome tools that are available now, like Copilot or Claude Code, you can quickly and easily build some of these applications fusing all these data sources together without having a super in-depth skill set. So that's it for this episode of the OSINT podcast. Again, if you wanted to follow along, we did cover issues 103 and 104. OSINTnewsletter.com/103 or /104. If you want to read the information about the traffic data, the cameras, and the rideshare information, you're going to have to subscribe as a paid subscriber. It's very inexpensive. It's $8 a month or $80 a year. Or put a different way, it is the cost of an OSINT certification for 100 years for some of these certifications that are upwards of $8,000. So definitely worth checking it out. And if you don't choose to subscribe, there's still a ton of free content that's available. Every other week, we're putting out free content. We're putting out free CDFs. We're putting out free tool sets. We have a small little section that is behind a paywall just to make sure that this thing continues to be sustainable. So definitely consider supporting us and make sure that this is sustainable for the long run. That's it for this episode. Thanks again for listening, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review if you enjoyed it. I'll see you again in the next one.